So very lovely. Thank you, choir. And so Advent begins. Welcome to the Advent season. It's so good to be together in this sacred season that prepares our hearts for a different kind of king. This season, we will be in the Gospel of Luke, and that's the gospel that is Advent friendly. So some years we are in Matthew, and Matthew has a story about genealogy and Joseph and wise men and a star, all good. But then the Gospel of Mark, you know what's in Mark about Advent and Christmas? Zippo. Nothing. The story just starts off to the races. And the final Gospel of John, has the poetry of where the Word becomes flesh and dwells among us. So Luke is our friend in Advent. So the Gospel of Luke has heartwarming stories about people, and it has eventually a story about a manger. Only the Gospel of Luke has the story about the manger. Only the Gospel of Luke has a story about shepherds and the heavenly hosts singing Gloria. And it has stories about beautiful characters, Zachariah and Elizabeth. We hear a whole bunch about Mary. And eventually we'll hear about Anna and Simeon as well. So I thought, great theme for this year, warm and delicious words. Who could use some warm and delicious words this season? So I thought Luke is our friend. Drink in some lovely, warm, and delicious words just in time. So our first people and story that prepare us for the arrival of this unique king are, who was that? Were you paying attention? It was Zachariah and Elizabeth. And we put them in stoles because the text is very clear that these people are people of God. And sometimes later in the Gospels, we have some people wearing stoles who are chief priests who may be wearing the items of religiosity but aren't practicing it. But in this case, Zachariah is a descendant of priests and is working as a priest, and even Elizabeth is a descendant of Aaron, one of the biggest priests of the Old Testament. So they are people who know about faith and they practice it. And both of them are deemed, that word I keep bringing up, it's in the Old Testament, it is in the New Testament, here it is in the Gospels, and the Apostle Paul loves this word, and it's as translated in our NRSV translation, they are righteous. So every time that word comes up, I know it's a word we have to be careful with. When we hear righteous, we think, self-righteous, get away from me. But when the Bible uses the word righteous, it's our signal that these people are good, they are kind, they are the gold standard of what God desires for every human being. Righteous people love God and they love neighbor. They're in it for other people, righteous people. So these two are righteous. And the Bible goes on to use another word that's a little troubling. And sometimes I see that word in the Psalms and I think, what does that mean? That word is blameless. And we're part of a Reformed tradition. We're Presbyterian, and we know no human is blameless except Jesus. So when we hear that somebody is blameless, we're thinking, not possible. But when the Bible uses that word for a human being, add on to that righteousness is kind of on the same spectrum as a righteous person. A blameless person is someone who has a conscience, and they think about what they've done and what they've not done. A blameless person knows that they have to work it, and they have faults, and they will be wrong. And so a blameless person is someone who also seeks out correction. Maybe a good word for a blameless person is someone who is correctable. Someone who is correctable. Someone who has integrity. So these are gold standard, platinum standard people, Zachariah and Elizabeth. The Bible is lifting them up like, wow, these are the people that we all look to for like what we're called to be like. So this couple, they have one of the classic biblical dilemmas. Do they have children? They do not. So that's a classic Bible story line, Old Testament, New Testament. And we have to acknowledge that in Bible times, having children was kind of raised up on a platform more. As much as we love children and we value children, in Bible times, it was a little bit more of a prejudice that, or a sign like, oh, you are blessed or you are not blessed, you are cursed. So there's some stuff around that narrative in the Bible, but it's used to indicate blessing. So in this story, heartwarming, warm, delicious story, Zachariah and Elizabeth find out they're pregnant. So heartwarming, lovely, warm, and delicious story. They're going to have a son. So part of this story, we didn't read this part aloud. We did 4 years ago. And I thought every time we look at a story, it's good to kind of look at different angles and different verses. In one of the paragraphs we didn't read, Zechariah is still at the temple, and he's just learned, and the angel's name is Gabriel. He's just learned, he's going to have a son. And Zechariah says, what? How can this be? And then Gabriel says, how dare you question me? And do you remember this? If anybody read this story or remembers, what happens to him? He loses his speech. So we really made a fuss over that 4 years ago. But I thought, this year it's good to look at different angles of the story. So Zechariah, the father, is struck mute. So the story, warm and delicious story, it's also comedic. So Zechariah is there, he's motioning, and when he comes out, the assembly's like, he's not talking. What's going on? He must have seen an angel. Must be something going down. So this year I thought, I was struck by how the angel talked about Zechariah and Elizabeth's son. So is Zechariah and Elizabeth's son Jesus? No. So it's kind of funny. Here we are plunged into these stories in Luke, and Luke tells stories about two babies. Not just one, not just baby Jesus, but another baby who ends up being Jesus's cousin. So this other child. So I kind of dug into, what did the angel tell Zechariah about this baby who's coming? So at first, the angel says, you will have such joy. And of course they do. Zechariah and Elizabeth experience such joy at the news that they're going to have a child. And Elizabeth even takes it like, I'm going to no longer be shamed in my community. I mean, that's the level of prejudice surrounding children at that time. And I would say, fortunately, I think that's an improvement in our era, that we don't shame or have that kind of prejudice. But clearly, Elizabeth lived with that burden. So she just took it as, an answer to prayer and an alleviation of psychic pain, psychic burden. So you, as parents, will have joy. God is going to rejoice in your child. And then it says, it doesn't say all people, it says many people will find joy in your child. So joy for the parents, joy in heaven, and many people will find joy in your son. The next thing that caught my eye in this story was an unusual verb that appears twice. And in the NRSV, the verb is turn. Turn. Your son will turn people toward God. Wow, your son is going to turn people to God? That's amazing. And it says turn again. Your son will turn parents to their children. That sounds pretty humbling. And finally, another act of this son is that he will turn the hearts of the disobedient to the righteous. The wisdom of the righteous. That's what their son is going to do, is take disobedient people and turn them toward the way of righteousness, kindness, and goodness. Sound easy? Maybe not so much. Maybe he sounds like kind of a troublemaker. Maybe he's pot stirrer. Then there's one more detail discovery I thought you would love about their baby boy. Verse 17. It says that their boy is going to have the power and the spirit of dun 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 dun. In other years, this would not make sense. It would not hit you. But this year, I hope it hits you. This baby boy is going to have the power and the spirit of Elijah. Elijah. So we've just completed this big study here, 15 weeks of 1st and 2nd Kings. Does anybody remember Elijah? I know. I am tormenting you because you thought, oh, we'll never have to talk about kings again, maybe not for 9 years. And here I am, 1 week later, bringing up our study of kings. Because there he is, Elijah, that big-time prophet. Week after week, we talked about Elijah and later his follower, who would be Elisha. Anybody remember Elijah? Anything about him at all come to mind? I know. You're still full of Thanksgiving dinner. Elijah. Thoughts about Elijah? Memories about Elijah? Or do I have to have the kids come in? Any vibes on Elijah at all? Was he a wuss? Yeah. He healed, he addressed. Do you remember one of the kings Elijah was up against? King Ahab. Remember King Ahab? You know, talk about disobedient, foolish, malicious, opposite of righteous. Elijah addressed King Ahab. So we had some things up about a vineyard, and how King Ahab was the one who took Naboth's vineyard. Very unrighteous act. And Elijah spoke to King Ahab. Story after story after story. Elijah's the one that cooked up that big thing against the priests of Baal, the prophets of Baal. Story after story. Elijah. Would you want a child like Elijah? Anybody here want a kid? I put it in the, want that? Troublemaker. Elijah. Would you want that kid? Would you want that for your child? So that is the news that Zechariah and Elizabeth are receiving about their kid. So, I just thought to myself, here I am. I'm trying to have a warm and delicious Advent, right? I'm up for a warm and delicious Advent. And here at church, we're competing against Black Friday and consumerism and, gadgets and technology and stuff. And here at church, trying to keep it warm and friendly and loving. And what do I get? John the Baptist. So this leads me to my favorite Advent meme. So see if you can bring him up here. My tech person. Awaken us, oh Lord. There he is. Happy Advent, you brood of vipers. I really was trying to avoid John the Baptist. So John the Baptist, if you look ahead, he makes an appearance as a grown-up. Luke chapter 3, we'll get to that in January. And the first words out of John the Baptist's mouth are, "You brood of vipers." And he's not saying it to a king. He's not saying it to the priest. He's saying it to the people. You brood of vipers. I don't think this sells well for the church. How about you? I mean, the deck is already stacked against us. And I was trying to be warm and fuzzy, and then there John is. I can't ignore him. So you might notice that our theme this year is warm, delicious words in big print, big font, and then under that font it says, a little smaller, that changed the world. Warm, delicious words that change the world. Luke is so good at that in these 2 chapters. Warm, delicious characters, warm, delicious stories. Love it, love it, love it. But they're a bit of a Trojan horse that comes galloping in to our fortress. We welcome it, and then, pow, we realize, oh my gosh, he's calling us a hypocrite, because that's what a viper is. We have not loved God. We have not loved our neighbor. It's so convicting. It's so Advent. How do we hold that up as a church? I thought, take another move from the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke leads with love. Leads with love. There's a song that we sang at Synod School. You put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. The Gospel of Luke leads with love. Zechariah, Elizabeth, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And then within that love comes the power to correct, the power to soften our hearts, the power to give up being judgmental, the power to love. There's kind of a progression of love. And maybe like our liturgy says, Advent is a time where we learn to deepen our love, like a progression there. You know, start with love and then trust love, even when it's murky. Hang in there with love. Learn a little bit more about love. And then I'd say lend legitimacy to love, because love gets a short shrift in our culture. I was thinking, do we really have to talk about this during Advent? But then I thought, there is no good time to talk about the challenge. There is no season where it's comfortable to talk about the challenge of loving God, loving neighbor, and not being a hypocrite. It's a challenge, and through that challenge, we are healed. It is a gift. It is the gift of Christmas. To have our hearts softened, to have our hearts opened, to have our hearts ready for more and more love. We can be a little bit like Zechariah and Elizabeth. First of all, this Advent season, we have a word of the day all across December. So I invite you, there's a brochure everybody got. I got more copies too if you need one. A word of the day. A little bit of a discipline. Look at the word of the day and see if that word softens you, makes you think about a prayer. And we can all be doing that at the same time, which just kind of has an incredible power. We're all doing the same prayerful act of discipline. Maybe that softens our hearts a little bit and makes us more into the image of Zechariah and Elizabeth, that journey. And then if we're on that journey of righteousness, we can maybe be a bit of a Zechariah and Elizabeth and lend legitimacy to a freak show like John. Because you could look at John the Baptist and just say, what a weirdo. You could just dismiss him. and fail to see that John the Baptist is a surgeon who can excise hypocrisy. He's a physical therapist that can soften hearts for the welcoming of a different kind of king. Let your life lend legitimacy to the way of love. To God be the glory. Amen.